Here are 10 mistakes to avoid in LOTRO, and then one major tip that if you do not follow, it will probably make you want to quit the game. If you are someone like me who's taken breaks from the game, or if you are someone who is new to the game, this guide is specific for you. But before I can tell you all of the juicy details from my failures, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel so much and I would greatly appreciate it. And now let's go revisit all of the failures that I've ever made in LOTRO. Before getting started in LOTRO, I would definitely recommend don't go into completionist mode. LOTRO is a huge MMO RPG open world game. It is massive because there is so much to do and there's just so many moving pieces to all of your quests and deeds that it's gonna be so difficult to 100% complete this game. I know so many people who are under their completionist mode that have played the game for years, and it takes years to try to even get into the completionist mindset or get near it. So if you're gonna go into the game thinking that you're gonna 100% complete everything, you have this goal that you wanna max out all of these characters and all of that, don't go in thinking about that whatsoever. The second mistake I would tell you to avoid, as this is something when you're getting started into the game, definitely make sure that you are saving your LOTRO points. If you do not save your LOTRO points, especially as a free account initially, you actually are going to run into a tough time in the future. With free accounts, you actually are going to have to pay for expansions once you hit around level 90 or 100. The good news is it is so long until you even get near those levels, so you have plenty of time to save up. If you don't know how to get LOTRO points, you can essentially farm them doing deeds, or you can pay for them. And not only expansions, this goes for anything. So there are writing skills that you'll need to access for other characters on your account if you want them to actually travel faster with a mount. And then there's also inventory space and then character slots, and all of that will integrate within the LOTRO store. So you need LOTRO points in order to afford those things. The third mistake I see a lot of people making is that you are not focusing on the main story quests. And this is something I have literally done for 11 years out of my 12. Me personally, I just never focused on the main story quest. I never liked it because I always had to travel from one region to the other, and it felt overwhelming when I could just work on all these side quests that are in one area. Though the issue with the main story quest is that it's attached to a deed, which is helpful for you. There are good rewards associated with that. But not only that, you're actually going to probably be in some areas where it might be restricted for you to get access into other areas. Mainly, I'm pulling this from the Angmar Waterstone quest, which for anyone who plays LOTRO, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But in the beginning of the main storyline quest, there is this part where you're going to have to go into Angmar, and if you do not go into Angmar and you do not focus on the main story quest, there is going to be a very deadly portion of Angmar for you. Basically, in the story quest, you're going to have to retrieve a heart from a Watcherstone that if you were to pass, you will instantly die. You have to essentially gain access to it, which you can only do by doing the main storyline quest. If you completely ignore that quest, you will not be able to access half of the Angmar map, which can be super vital for group content more specifically. Now, I do understand there are a lot of quests within LOTRO, but I'm just asking you to be a little more specific about which side quests you work on, and always kind of keep in mind to keep the main story quest going. The fourth mistake that you want to avoid is just not even reading your quests, which is also another mistake I have personally made for several years. I never read quests. I always hit the buttons. I'd always click accept. I never read through them. But of course, there are some quests where you kind of need to read through them because sometimes you are actually going to imprison people. I just encountered this in Rohan, where I am glad I was reading the quests, where I essentially had to decide which of these 3 people potentially did a whole murder, and I still wasn't even that convinced after I read everyone's accounts of where they were the night of the murder, and it was just so overwhelming. But it was also very immersive because I was so into that quest. I was like, oh my gosh, this is high stakes here. There's also quests that need you to be in specific areas or are timed quests that you might miss if you do not read the quest. If you fail a quest, sometimes there are timers associated with them, so definitely make sure that you're reading your quests. The fifth mistake I'm going to tell you to avoid is by not working on deeds. I've kind of already hinted towards this, but deeds are super important because they actually are tied to virtues, and virtues are are tied to stats that are going to help upgrade your character. So if you completely ignore deeds, it's actually going to very much hurt your gameplay experience because your character is probably going to be squishy as heck and you're just going to really not have any LOTRO points to kind of advance your overall gameplay. The sixth mistake I also see is that you don't start focusing on expanding your inventory earlier on in the game. One thing that's really nice about the inventory space in the game is that it actually applies to your entire account. So no matter where you go, no matter what server you're on, as long as you're under the same account, you're going to have the same amount of inventory slots unlocked for each and every one of your characters. This is actually something that's pretty inexpensive to buy within the LOTRO store. You do have to pay LOTRO points in order to get more inventory slots. The seventh mistake, I just want to mention that I haven't heard many people say this, but I know this is something I did personally, but make sure you're not grinding one specific class trait tree. What I mean by that is that every class, no matter what you play, whether it's like Bjorning, Minstrel, Warden, you're going to have 3 trait trees, class trait trees. Typically people refer to them as blue line, red line, yellow line. Now at some point the game is going to ask you to specialize in one of those lines, but what I do want to mention is that you do have a page kind of hidden on the right where it says 1 or 2, and if you hit the 2, it's actually going to give you a chance to have a second specialization, so you can kind of flip between 1 and 2. So this actually is super vital, especially if you're going to start getting into like group content and raids. More or less just make sure that you're being flexible and that you don't always have to heavily dedicate your skill points into one area. You can actually diversify them. The 8th mistake I'm going to mention here is pretty simple. Don't forget to lock your quick slots, because I do that a lot. There's actually a keybind that you're gonna wanna look at on how to lock and unlock your quick slots. When you first get into the game, your quick slots are going to be unlocked. What I mean by that is if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have your skills on that bar, and you can actually take your cursor, hold and move them around, move your skills around to whatever sort of position you want. And then of course, you have to remember to lock the quick slots. So if you don't lock them, and you use your cursor to hit skills, it will actually drag and drop your skill and then it will be out of the quick slot bar, and then you have to go back into your skill panel and then reslot it, and it's just pretty bad, especially when you're in like the midst of combat. It's actually a pretty simple mistake to make. I've done it numerous times, but you know, especially when you first get into the game, it's something that will probably come up. The 9th mistake some people are making is you're not reading your skills. It's actually quite simple, but make sure you're reading through your skills and your abilities. You can actually do that by taking your cursor, scrolling over one of your skills and having your cursor sit there for about like 3 seconds, and then it will have a panel that'll tell you more about your skill. It sounds super simple, but I would recommend that everyone kind of goes through the skill panel, especially when you're first starting or especially when you're first getting back, because some of the skills have drastically changed in the last couple of years. And then last but not least, and I feel like this is so overlooked, but make sure you are keeping like a minimum balance in your wallet. Basically in LOTRO, the way that you would interact with vendors and NPCs is that you have coins. Make sure that you are actually giving yourself kind of like a minimum amount that you want in coins at all times, and make sure that you keep your wallet above that, because there might be a time, especially when you're just getting into the game, where you just only have a couple of silver and maybe you just died and you have to repair your armor. And if you do not have enough coin to repair your armor, that's going to be super stressful. Now the good news is that that doesn't really happen too much. It typically happens when you're kind of getting ahead of yourself in the game and then you end up dying a couple different times, or maybe you've just bought like a big purchase within the game and then you just completely forgot about everything else that you're going to have to use your coins for, like paying a mortgage for your home in the game and just other responsibilities that you might have as you progress within the game. But this also ties into the fact that you probably will want to craft, because that's probably the quickest way to make money in LOTRO is by actually having a crafting vocation and then using those items that you then craft and can make and putting those in the auction hall. That's personally been the #1 way I've found to make money in LOTRO, is just by crafting something pretty particular and then putting it up, and then people will actually be pretty desperate sometimes for resources that they'll have no problem paying whatever sort of price you set in the auction hall. It's quite crazy. And of course, if you need a rundown on how the auction hall works in LOTRO, I have a video I'm gonna put up above that I recommend you check out. It's just a basic auction hall guide. But before you go check that video out, I just want to give you one more final tip. Now, this is something I haven't heard anyone say yet, but if you are getting started into LOTRO, or you're someone who's taken a very long gap, like 5+ years away from the game, I just recommend that you pick a basic class difficulty. Definitely don't pick an advanced class like brawlers, wardens. Now, I know what you're thinking. You might have a class that you're just dying to try, and you're like, oh my gosh, but the difficulty is moderate. Well, moderate's not that bad, right? I actually would probably disagree with you, because each class has something unique to them. And actually, like for an example, warden is actually very different in comparison to any other class within LOTRO. So if you were to pick like warden for an example and start that, and you end up not liking it and you feel it's too complicated, or you just feel like you're not understanding the game at all, you'll probably be less likely to check out any other classes, because you'll just be so kind of upset with how the warden worked for you that you won't want to give any of the other classes a try. And you didn't even know that all of these other classes did not function anywhere close to how the warden works. So I would honestly personally just recommend that you all go and get a basic class. Start with like your hunters, a guardian, a champion, something that will be simple for you. And then of course, that class that you're dying to play, I would definitely recommend you make a second character, because everyone should get a minimum of 2 character slots. Make that your second character, but don't start playing that until you feel like you've gotten a good steady footing on your basic class that you've just started. And if you do want some class recommendations, I do have a video I recommend you check out after this video. It's going to help you figure out which class might work best for you. So go check out that video, and as always, make sure you stay weird, weirdos.